So we'll just get started, and then everyone can also continue chatting over morning tea, which we've arranged for you at about 10:45. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we're meeting today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It really is a gorgeous location right next to Lake Munga. So if you don't have to race off to work after this, highly recommend just taking in the gorgeous scenery and heading for a little walk whenever you can. So I'm Michelle. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to be talking today about grandparents as healthy lifestyle champions, and I'll also get through sort of how this research project came to be. So a few acknowledgements before I start. This is Healthway funded research. It's 7 years in the making. So Healthway kindly funded two research projects of ours. The first was specifically looking at grandparents and how kids are eating when they're with their grandparents. And then the second project we did looked at physical activity. So we're sort of working through a lot of the determinants of chronic disease, essentially. So the next thing on the list is sleep habits. We're not quite there yet. We're still sort of figuring out what we're going to do with this research and developing an intervention to start helping and supporting families when there's kids around. So Healthway funded the research project. It was a collaboration with Cancer Council WA, Cancer Council Victoria, the Kids Research Institute, used to be Telethon Kids, ECU, and the University of Western Australia. So I'm from Perth, so my work here began before I moved to Melbourne 5 years ago. A lot of people involved in this. We have Anne over here, who's kindly joined us today and helped with a lot of the fact sheets that are out at the front. So thank you to Anne for her help with that. And then just a lot of people on the research team. So it's not just me. A lot of people behind the scenes put this together. So this is where the research sort of started. What we were finding is that over the last few decades, there was increasing maternal participation in the workforce. So more mums are going to work, right? Cost of living crisis, we now need dual earner households. We now need both mum and dad working. We also found that formal childcare, people were reporting, was becoming unaffordable, very expensive. Also, a lot of, in some areas, there's just no places available for formal childcare. You're on wait lists, and formal childcare is often not very flexible. You have to drop off your kid at a certain time. You have to make sure you're there at a certain time to pick them up. And that's just not the way people work these days. People like flexibility. So this is where grandparents came in. So here are some stats from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. These relate to WA, actually. So when we look at kids who are in care, we have more kids who are in informal care than in formal care. So more kids are being looked after by their grandparents or by aunts, uncles, neighbours. And then when we dig a little bit deeper into that informal care, grandparents are the number one. Right, so we have, at least in the under twos, 20,000 children under the age of 2 informal care, and 14,500 are being cared for by their grandparents. So these are huge numbers. And yet a lot of our efforts are directed towards, and rightfully so, early childcare centres, making sure that the formal childcare centres are appropriately regulated. But it does mean that we're missing the key informal childcare providers. So essentially, grandparents are a key source of childcare. In Australia, they're the number one source. They are also the number one source globally. So this isn't just an Australian thing. This is a thing we're seeing all around the world. And they're also providing a lot of hours of care. It's not just this ad hoc 1 hour of babysitting a week. When we dive deeper, 34% of children who are in grandparental care are getting more than 10 hours a week of this care. Like, these are huge numbers. 50% of grandparents who said they provide care also said they do more than 10 hours a week. And 20% are caring for the kids for more than 20 hours a week, right? So a lot of it, and often. And so it's no surprise then that there's been a lot of calls to start including grandparents in support systems. There's a lot of stuff for parents. There's a lot of stuff for those more formal entities, but less so for grandparents. They seem to be still overlooked. And it's concerning as well because there's a lot of stereotypes out there, and I've put some stereotypes up there in the form of memes. It might be a little bit too small, But the stereotype out there as well is that kids are going to their grandparents and they're coming back loaded full of sugar, and we need to stop that. Or they're coming back from grandma's house and they're just full of all the junk food. But is this actually the case? No one had really done a lot of research to look into that. And so if we want to support grandparents, we need to find out first and hear from them about what they're struggling with, if they're struggling, and what grandkids are eating while they're in their care. And so that's what we aim to do with our project. So essentially, we wanted to explore the nutrition beliefs and practices of grandparents and also the physical activity beliefs and practices of grandparents, and then see if those practices and beliefs impact on what the child is eating and doing when they're with their grandparents. Now, you'll hear a term movement behaviours. I'll sort of use that interchangeably. Movement behaviours for this presentation is physical activity and screen time. So formally, it's physical activity, screen time, and sleep. But we haven't looked at sleep yet. That's the next step. So just physical activity and screen time. So we had, like I said, 2 projects that were funded by Healthway, and we ran 7 studies across those 2 projects. And we really wanted to hear from grandparents who provided regular care to grandchildren in that really sort of key phase of life, that sort of developmental, the habits that they develop in these years go through to them in adulthood. And we defined regular as more than 3 hours of care per week. So we're focusing really on the grandparents who are having the most impact on their grandchildren's lives. So 2 projects, like I said, the first one focused on nutrition, which had an online survey and focus groups. And then project 2, we followed the same methodology, online survey and focus groups. So I'm just going to jump straight ahead to the results. We do have infographics at the front with all the results from all the 7 studies. These are available online as well. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be a QR code where you can that takes you to the website if you're interested. So the first study we looked at was, are they playing a role? Are they feeding the grandkids? What are they feeding them? And what we found is that the majority of them, 82%, were giving grandkids snacks. Makes sense. If you're taking care of them, the kids are going to be hungry. You're going to be feeding them snacks. 18% were also, though, providing breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. So almost all meals. That's almost 1 in 5. And what we found was that grandparents were providing these main meals about 1 to 3 times per week, and they were giving snacks around 2 to 6 times per week. So yeah, the answer is yes, they are involved in feeding the grandkids, perhaps not as much as with parents, but when kids are getting at least half of their meals from their grandparents, then we should be including them in support services like we're working on with parents. We found that grandparents were generally providing a healthy food environment, which was really good. So they frequently provided the fresh fruits, milks, cheeses, vegetables, right? Now, obviously, it's self-report, but it was an anonymous survey. So that sort of helps us think, maybe they were being quite honest here. But they are providing a pretty good environment. And they're also adopting what we call positive feeding practices. So these are the things that have been found in the research to be most likely to help with healthy eating. So they're encouraging balance and variety. They're providing a healthy food environment. They've got healthy food in the home. They're setting limits on unhealthy foods and drinks. So still allowing it, but setting limits, that sort of structure-based approach. And they're also modeling healthy eating themselves. Right? So they're sitting with the grandchild and they're eating healthily in front of them. We also looked at then not what they're doing, but what's the relationship between what they're doing and what their grandkids are doing. And bear with me, here's what we found. So grandparents who provided a healthy food environment, what we found is that their grandkids tended to consume more fruit and vegetables, right? So just having those things in the house means the kids are eating it more. Makes sense. It's all about availability and accessibility. But not only are they eating fruit and vegetables more, they're also eating less of the junk food, the savoury snacks, the sweet snacks. And then the setting limits on unhealthy foods was also important. So we also found that they consumed the unhealthy foods less. So this was the main sort of stuff that we were interested in, what's their feeding practices. But we found a few other things that we thought was interesting in the research. So what grandparents ate themselves impacted what the grandchildren ate. Again, it makes sense, especially from that modelling perspective. So grandchildren ate what their grandparents ate. So if the grandparents' diet was healthy, the grandchildren's diet was healthy. Now, obviously, this won't come as a shock to anyone. Food fussiness was a big barrier. So grandparents who said that their kids were fussy or their grandkids were fussy around their food, those grandchildren ate less fruit and vegetables. Okay, so food fussiness came up as a big thing, which is why if you manage to grab some of the handouts at the front, we've got the case of the fussy grandchild, which just gives some hints and tips on what to do if you do have a fussy grandchild. It also applies to parents with fussy children around, how do we manage this? Because it's something that the grandparents were really struggling with. The other thing grandparents were struggling with, and I suspect parents are struggling with this as well, is pestering. So children pestering them for unhealthy food. So we call it giving into requests. Pestering is not a very nice word to use in the literature, so we say giving into requests. So grandchildren ate more of that sort of savoury snacks, sweet snacks, and sugary drinks if their grandparents gave into them. No surprises. Parents would likely find the same result with parents. So what we concluded from that, which I'll get into later on, is we need to also be supporting grandparents and probably parents with what to do when your grandkid is really pestering you. Like, what strategies can you use to help them, move towards the more healthier options that are available? In terms of the focus groups, we then asked grandparents, what's getting in the way of providing healthy eating? What are some barriers? And so these are the ones that came up. So, of course, grandchildren preferring unhealthy foods or not liking healthy foods as much. Interestingly, grandparents also said that their grandchildren's parents promoted unhealthy food consumption. So this is a really interesting sort of space in the literature, because we have parents saying, well, when I pick up the kids from grandma's, they're full of sugar. And then we have grandparents saying, yeah, but when I go over to their place all the time, they're always eating junk food because mum and dad have gotten home from work late and there's no time to make a home-cooked meal. Like, at least I'm making them a home-cooked meal. Yes, I give them a lolly every now and then. So there's a little bit of conflict, for lack of a better word, there, and we need to really be getting them onto the same page. Obviously, we've got then the broader environment in which we live, which came up as being problematic. So advertising for unhealthy food on TV, which Cancer Council is doing a lot of great work on to reduce that. Supermarket layouts, so the chocolates and the lollies at the checkouts and within easy reach of kids. So grandparents really, really struggled with that when they do have to take them shopping and they're just constantly reaching for the unhealthy food because it's at their level. And then we had a few other things like as children get older, they're obviously increasing their autonomy. Sometimes they have their own pocket money and the grandparents can't always control what they buy with that pocket money. So there are a few barriers there. But we also asked them, well, what do you do then to sort of help? What helps when you're with your grandkids? And they came up with quite a few strategies that they use. Some great, some might need some working on. So the first thing was, and the biggest one, was disguising healthy foods. So they talked about pulsing vegetables, creating soups, hiding vegetables in, spaghetti bolognese, the stuff that, parents do as well. They also talked about making fruit and vegetables appealing. So using different colors and different shapes and making sure that there was dip around as well to sort of change that taste of it. They spoke a lot about involving children in food prep, in cooking, getting their hands dirty, helping them make bread. This isn't on the list, but gardening as well came up. So having a veggie patch, taking the kids out, teaching kids that food comes from the garden and not the frozen food section in Coles. So that was important. Providing rewards for healthy food consumption. I'll get into that a little bit later. That can sometimes be problematic. The setting limits, which I've spoken about, which is really important, and saying no. So like I said, lots of different things there. that, some are good, some we might need to tweak a little bit, but broadly they're doing their best. And then to help us sort of in the intervention development stage, we also asked them, well, would you be open to receiving support in the form of an intervention? And they overwhelmingly said yes. But we also asked them, well, what should this look like? Because we want to get it right. And so this is what they said they wanted, okay? They wanted educational information, but it was very specific. It was information that explained how consumption impacts health in the short and long term. Right? So how does eating your vegetables help you? And then they would then teach that with the kids. So things like, well, eating carrots is good for X, or eating cauliflower is good for Y. So getting down to that level, as opposed to just, well, it's good for you. That wasn't enough for them. They know it's good. They want to know exactly how, and they want to be able to teach their grandkids that. But also crucially, they wanted hints and tips. Like they wanted to know, how do I manage food fussiness? How do I encourage healthy eating? What interactive activities can I do with my grandkids to teach them about healthy eating and increase their consumption and their interest in fruit and vegetables? And so if you haven't picked them up already, we've got some activity cards at the front that helps with exactly this, right? Creating that curiosity, but not necessarily putting pressure on them to eat. The other thing which we thought was pretty crucial was around what they didn't want. And grandparents overwhelmingly said, if you tell us what to feed our grandkids, we're going to see that as condescending, which it makes sense. We all know that fruit and vegetables is good. We all know we're meant to be feeding grandkids that, kids that. What we're struggling is with the how. So don't give us the why, or don't give us the, you need to feed them more fruit and vegetables. Give us hints and tips for that. I'm just going to stop there because I'm about to move on to the physical activity part. Do we have any questions? Yeah. Yeah.
Is all that information is already out there? Is there a desire of that content or way to deliver those things to everyone?
Yeah, so that's something that we're looking at now. I'll get into it at the end of the presentation, but I'll just touch on it briefly, is that some grandparents were aware of where they could go for those hints and tips, others not so much. And they also found the amount of information that's out there overwhelming, and also what to trust and what not to trust. So, and certainly the case with physical activity as well, they really just wanted a one-stop shop for where to go for all this information. Yeah. Yeah. I have not gotten into that, but I can speak to it now. Yeah, so they're using online, definitely. They also quite liked the idea of seminars. They really loved the focus groups because they could talk to each other, and they actually got a lot of hints and tips from each other. So seminars, and just the traditional stuff as well, like in the newspaper. Is there a flyer that can be delivered in the newspaper, a pamphlet at the local library or at the local GP as well? So places where, they are likely to be. But yeah, online, they're definitely online. Yeah. Great. Okay. So on to the next research project. This one's a little bit more recent. So this is on physical activity. Okay. So what are kids doing when they're with their grandparents? From a movement perspective and also from a screen time perspective. So what we found was that play-based activity was most common, and pleasingly, over 3/4 of grandparents said that their grandkids usually or always played in the backyard. So they're using the resources they've got, right? The kids are playing outside. Kids played outside around 2.5 hours per week, which was good. That was around 1/5 of time in care. So they are getting out there. And almost 2/3 played with toys and equipment, so bats and balls. So that came up as important as well. But engagement in screen time was high. Again, I don't think that's unique to grandparents. I think parents are also struggling with this. So grandchildren spent about 3 hours every week engaged in some sort of screen-based activity. I should specify this is not like homework. We excluded homework and things that a sort of adaptive sedentary behavior. This is, playing video games, watching TV, things like that. And when we calculated that as a proportion of how much time they're spending in care, it's a quarter. So a quarter of the time that kids are with their grandparents, they're on screens. Again, I don't think that's unique to grandparents. I think parents are also struggling with that as well. Similar to what sort of we found with the healthy eating stuff, what we found was that grandkids were doing more physical activity when their grandparents supported that. No surprises there. What does that support look like, or what could it look like? I'll get into in the sort of section at the end. And also grandparents who did more physical activity had grandkids who did more physical activity. Grandparents did really consider physical activity to be important, and they also considered healthy eating important. So everyone's on board. Everyone wants children to be healthy. It's how we go about doing that. So those hints and tips I spoke of earlier. Grandparents said they often helped or offered to be active with their grandkids when they could, helping them learn the skills, kicking around a ball, for example. But what we also found is that grandparents, and this might also apply to parents, who nagged their grandkids to be more active, had more kids who then spent time on electronic devices. Now, we're not sure of the cause and effect there. We're not sure if the nagging just means the kids become more stubborn and don't get off the screens, or if screen time is already high and the nagging is in response to the fact that it's so high. So we need to tease that apart a bit more. But then, of course, what the grandparents did influenced the grandkids. So if the grandparents watched a lot of TV, the grandkids too. Here are some things that got in the way when we asked grandparents, what's getting in the way of you promoting physical activity and reducing screen time? The effort with organising activities makes sense. There was one great quote from someone who said, if I want to take 3 kids to the beach, I have to put in towels, and then I have to put in all things that they can play with at the beach, and then I have to get them all in the car, and then I have to bring them home, and there's sand everywhere. Like it's a lot. It's a lot for grandparents. And then the financial cost as well. Like the beach is somewhat free, but if you want to take them to the local swimming pool, there's going to be an entry fee. Sometimes local government does some free activities, but they were really struggling with that. A lot of those play centres are actually quite costly when you're looking after a few kids to be able to get into there. Then you have to feed them, and they were struggling with that. Of course, their own age and mobility issues, especially if they were on the older side, they just couldn't run around after the kids anymore. And that came up in terms of the local environment as well, which is the next point. So if they were lucky enough to have a park nearby, but that park didn't have a fence around it, then they were worried that if, their 2-year-old or the 3-year-old goes running, and as an older grandparent, they can't chase after them. And so they were really fearful of, what if the kid runs on the road, right? So it wasn't just there's no park nearby, it's that the park's not safe, or it hasn't got, it's not sun smart. So lots of things happening there. There had to be safe facilities nearby too. Of course, we've got kids using parents and grandparents against each other. So I'm allowed to watch this TV show at mum's place. Why can't I watch it here? So using those sort of strategies against the grandparents. The caring for kids of different ages, and especially caring for older kids, that was tricky as well, because how do you create an activity that everyone's interested in? A 3-year-old, what entertains them is going to be very different to what you can do to entertain an 8-year-old. So, it was tricky there when there were, especially during school holidays, where there's lots of kids you're playing, you're having to entertain, essentially. And older kids also have more experience with electronic devices as well. So they're on their phones a lot more. And something that grandparents were worried about was, well, if they're interacting socially with their friends, I don't want to take that away from them. I don't want to isolate them more from their friends. So that was a concern too. In terms of, though, well, what helps you reduce screen time? I'm very sorry, it's a little bit small. Integrating physical activity into daily routines. So dog walking was a really popular one. If the grandparents had a dog, then the grandparents would encourage the kids to go for a walk with the dog, play with the dog in the backyard, and that really facilitated physical activity, which is consistent with the research when we look at, if you do have a dog, using it as much as possible to get your kids being active. Encouraging them to play with each other as much as possible, not just each other, but also other kids at the park, if you can take them to the park. Like I said, a safe local environment was really important. Making sure parents and grandparents are on the same page. That was a key one, so that the kids can't come in and divide and conquer. Involving grandkids in decisions. So this sort of increases that autonomy. So providing them with a choice. You don't have to say, what do you want to do today? Which is likely going to elicit I just want to watch TV response. But we can go to the park, we can go do this, or we can go do that. What's the option that you want to take today? So still offering that chance to have an opinion and have that autonomy, but not keeping it so open-ended that, they end up using it against you. Creating an environment that supports activity and limits screen time. This was a little bit trickier for the grandparents who lived in apartment complexes or had downsized and didn't have back or front yards as much. So having a local park was really important, but also making sure that the Wi-Fi was turned off before the kids came over. So I'm going to try and synthesize all of that into some conclusions. So grandparents are obviously having a significant influence on the lives of their grandkids. So we knew that they were taking a lot of care of their grandkids. And then what we found with our research is they should be really considered important stakeholders to address childhood nutrition, physical activity, screen time. They seem to be providing them with a healthy food environment, but we do need to support them to help them with that food fussiness, which came up as a really key barrier. So overall, our initiatives need to be extended to grandparents and other informal caregivers. Practically, they need strategies to help them promote consumption of disliked foods, managing food refusal. So that comes back to this, the case of the fussy grandchild handout that we created. And I mentioned earlier that there were some strategies that might not be the best. So grandparents often provided rewards. If you eat your broccoli, you'll get an ice cream. And it sort of creates this imbalance between sort of good foods and bad foods, which we need to sort of stay away from creating. So moving away from that. All foods are good. And then the disguising. So disguising is a good strategy, but we also need to expose them to vegetables in their original form, or then they're never going to sort of know what they're eating. So what the research tends to suggest here is you can disguise foods, but also use some exposure strategies to get them eating an actual piece of broccoli, for example, as opposed to broccoli that's been pulsed into a juice. You can do both. Obviously, there's an opportunity to improve movement behaviours. We need to help with reducing screen time. The dog walks, like I said, play-based activity is really important. So having portable play equipment in the home was key here. So whether the parents take that portable equipment to the grandparents' house instead of the iPad, or whether the grandparents have their own set of portable play equipment at the home if they're able to, that was key. That was key as well. That having that play equipment really facilitates that activity. There's stuff then that they can use. They can literally throw around a ball, and there's a lot more options there. In terms of support, that was really important. What we mean by support is, because obviously, we're also aware that not all grandparents can sort of get down in the grass and play with their grandkids, but even turning up to their grandkids' soccer match is a way that you can show support and how much you value physical activity. T-ball, soccer, dancing, whatever it is, you can still be there as a spectator. So that's what we're recommending by support. You don't have to kick the ball around with them if you're not able, but there are other ways you can show support as well. Co-engaging with physical activity is really important, again, if they're able. So can you go on a bike ride with the kids or kick around a ball? But it's really around sort of empowering grandparents as well, and having those resources that empower grandparents. Like I mentioned earlier around the nagging, using pressure, guilt doesn't help. We want to be supportive, using supportive and encouraging messages. We need to make sure we get parents and grandparents on the same page. And this might not necessarily be relevant to many of you, but we really need to be also advocating our local governments for affordable, high quality local facilities, right? The local park needs to have a fence around it. It should have shade. Things should be as inexpensive as possible. Because especially if grandparents are watching grandkids regularly and the kids aren't at school yet, having to do an activity every day is going to start costing a lot of money, and things aren't cheap at the moment. So we've taken all of that to create the various resources that you've seen outside, and we're currently working on developing that one-stop shop where grandparents can go, but not just grandparents, but families. So the more we looked into this, the more we realized it's not about creating a separate whole set of things for grandparents. We need to be working on all, like, families, anyone involved in the care of children. It needs to be intergenerational, and people need to be on the same page and able to communicate with each other. So this is where Chill for Families comes in, and thanks to Tony at Gatecrasher for helping us develop this, our logo. So Chill for Families, the Chill stands for Creating Healthy Intergenerational Lifestyle Lessons. We're currently working on getting some funding to develop this project. Some of you wrote your name and email address to get more information. That QR code also just takes you to the Qualtrics survey if you want to be updated on Chill for Families. We're also keen to hear from anyone who wants to be involved in its development, who wants to sort of, say to us, this is what I'm noticing with the people I'm seeing. Can you please make sure that you include this in your intervention? So please do sign up. We'll keep you updated. If the funding's successful, we'll be coming back to Perth next year and the year after to run focus groups with, again, families, grandparents, parents, health professionals, to really make sure that this intervention is something that everyone wants and that's going to be used. Right? Rather than just an app that we all download that we forget about later on, or we have to delete because we need the space on our phone. We don't want to be the app that the people delete to get extra space. So thank you. I'll take questions now, but this is another QR code. I'm sorry for all the QR codes. This takes you to my website. All the resources that are at the front are on my website. So if you don't like the physical copy, or if you want to share it with others, they're all on my website. The research infographics, the activity cards, the fact sheets, it's all there. And everything that we do from now on will also be going on that. So make sure you check it out. Thank you. Thanks. So any questions? What issues are we seeing out there with kids? Yeah.
I pass information on to the grandparents, or make a comment that I'm kind of made out to be like this kind of health person.
Yeah.
So I actually don't say anything, even though I'm
yeah. It comes up in the literature a lot. Not so much that, but also people are reluctant to say something because parents are reluctant because they don't want to lose that key childcare. They don't want the grandparents to suddenly turn around and go, well, F you, I'm not looking after the kids anymore. And grandparents don't want to lose that access to their grandkids by doing the wrong thing. So it's this really tricky situation. So what we're hoping to do with our program is we've got a positive parenting expert coming in to help us with this program as well, because we want to create a module that helps parents and grandparents talk and communicate and have those effective strategies to reduce conflict, because it's something that's been found even in the literature in America. Like it's really tricky. How do we get people on the same page? Yeah.
a really important role.
Yeah.
Sometimes I see it, well, I'm just a fine grandparent.
Totally.
Not that often, but if you actually add up the hours.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, actually, because it encourages buy-in from the grandparents. They're not just the babysitter. It's, oh no, I'm actually a very important care provider now. Yeah.
Like if they do like 2 dinners a week, or even 1 dinner a week, that's like almost half the week. So
Yeah.
half the week they're getting spoiled because they're with
Yeah.
grandparents. That's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. 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 That gap that we identified was really surprising, because when we talk to grandparents and when we talk to parents, like this is a really interesting topic. Like whenever I talk to parents about it, they're like, oh yeah, actually did a podcast episode recently. I think it's called The Kick. And they did this whole episode on it because they were like, yeah, our grandparents, the grandparents are the ones that are looking after the kids when we're working. So how is there nothing in this space to be helping them? So yeah, it's huge.
Is there a recommendation about how much exercise, like I've got a 3-year-old grandson, that he should be doing? Because I feel like sometimes I exhaust him now all the time.
Yeah.
Is that
I'll need to check I mean, there are guidelines. I can't remember them off the top of my head. 3 hours of physical activity. And it's like outdoor play sort of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. 3 hours. There you go. So you're not tiring them out at all. Keep going. Keep going. 3 hours minimum for kids. There you go.
It's quite interesting. I have 2 daughters with children. One which sends the grandchildren over with the Femco box full of fruit and vegetables and
Yeah.
really good things and the school equipment. The other one, literally opens the car doors without going down. So after one of my daughters,
Yeah.
teach the other one.
Yeah.
I don't feel that they can to each other.
Different styles.
I'm kind of sort of in the middle of that.
Yeah.
Really want my youngest granddaughter comes over to give her those healthy things and
Yeah.
make her come outside. But the other two, not a problem, because that's better every day.
Yeah.
So I can see 2 completely different parenting styles.
Exactly. It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's also the parenting styles, which the grandparents here came up. You know, some grandparents were mentioning the going over and seeing KFC every time they went over, and others were not seeing that. So yeah. Was there a question, Peter?
Yes. Has there been work done on the circumstance where the parents are, where the child has been taken from the parents and the parents are incompetent due to
Yeah.
drugs?
Yeah.
Whatever. They made these experiences, and the single largest problem that we didn't ever resolve was the damage done by the parents in having contact with their birth parents.
Yeah.
And then having to recover from that, while recognizing that the child needed contact with.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. A lot of the research on, so what we call that is custodial grandparentship. So the grandparents that have taken over. Most of the research on that has been done in the US because of the significant drug problems that are occurring over there. I haven't been able to find much research in Australia on the custodial. Oh, did you have something in mind? Of course. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. So you should exchange details then. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about David's work. So David Cole at ECU does a lot of, grandparents who are now actually raising the grandkids, and the parents are not necessarily in the picture, working with Wansley. So yeah, definitely exchange details at morning tea time. Well, but for the next people, Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And it goes beyond physical activity and nutrition to mental health as well. Like it's not just, we have to keep these research projects contained. But like I said, we could be looking at sleep. We could be looking at mental health. There's loads of things that needs to happen in this space. Yeah. Any other final questions? And we got a morning tea. Yeah. Capacity to what, sorry? Co-engage. I think does it depend on, I think it depends on whether the grandparents are mobile enough to be able to do that. we tried with these resources to get the Melbourne University's Disability Institute on board, because we wanted to make sure that the resources were also sort of, you know, we're not just saying co-engage if you actually physically aren't able. They had no expert there who could help them, so we sort of had to try our best and sort of just put in parentheses if you're able. So no, I'm not aware of any research that's sort of helped with that actual co-engagement. I mean, I'm imagining programs for grandkids and for grandkids and grandparents to come together, you know, sort of like, you know, how you can go to the movies with the baby and me. It's like the same thing, but for grandparents, especially during school holiday time when they need help doing activities. So that's my best guess. Oh yeah, oh my God, the Nature Play program. Sorry, yes. Yeah. 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 Right. There you go. Nature Play. So you guys can have a chat during morning tea time too.
What do you do?
This sounds like an Anne Finch question. Bribery around physical activity, eating. That's definitely an Anne Finch question. Yeah.
You do. Yeah. So there's a school of thought called division of responsibility, and so that basically says, as the provider, you decide what is on offer, and where it's on offer, and the child decides if they're going to eat and how much. So if there's dessert, if there's ice cream, then the kid gets to have the ice cream. You know, that's one of the options. You can have the broccoli and the ice cream. If you don't eat broccoli, you still get the ice cream. I think there's trying to put all of those foods on a level playing field. At some point, kids are going to be able to get out and I want them to be able to listen to their voice and not consider the broccoli the chore and then the ice cream the reward. Yeah, and kind of set up those associations. Yeah. Long term. So yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so there's no easy answer, and especially when the kids are getting different strategies from like daycare, or primary school, and parents and grandparents. Yeah, there's no easy option, but trying to kind of treat all foods with a kind of new script hard. Yeah, small kids like kind of thing, but so if they don't want to eat broccoli, then that's okay. We continue to offer. We put things on their plate and know they're not going to eat it, and don't pressure them to. That it's an option. And kids are curious, and if you're eating the broccoli and nobody's making a big deal about it, one day they might look at it, one day they might taste it. Nothing might happen for the next 3 weeks, and then it kind of becomes a normal part. Persisting and trying not to do that. If you eat that, then you can have that. Yeah.
So Anne's one of the accredited dietitians working at Cancer Council, and she's also going to be involved in this intervention development. So very lucky to have her. Great. So thank you again for coming. I'm obviously sticking around because my flight to Melbourne isn't until tomorrow. So if you have any questions, let me know. Do make sure you pick up some of those handouts at the back, but they're also online. We've got a lovely, healthy morning tea, so please do stick around for that. We specifically asked, I don't have it on me, but one of the activity cards out there is creating a rainbow platter. We asked our caterers to create a rainbow platter. So I hope they got the brief and they've done that for us. So please enjoy. Thank you so much.